Welcome. It's great to see everybody here today. We had a wonderful panel this morning, and I thank the panelists who were on that in that discussion. And we're moving on to our second panel, which is about sex trafficking in the United States. And we have three wonderful guests who have come from all sorts of places, Washington, New York, and Minneapolis, who are all service providers who do direct service with people that have been trafficked or are in the sex trade in one way or another. So our first speaker is Vednita Carter. She's an author and trainer and an award-winning pioneer in the abolitionist movement. She has extensive experience in developing and planning programs for sex-trafficked women and girls, and was recently awarded the Norma Hodling Award for her lifelong service to victims of sex trafficking. She's the founder and continues to run an organization called Breaking Free in Minneapolis, which is a service provider organization. And she's really, you've been affiliated with the Coalition Against Trafficking in Women, and and has really been a leader and an outspoken advocate in the anti-trafficking movement. So I'd like to welcome Vednita.
Thank you. I'll just start by talking a little bit about what Breaking Free believes and how we view the issue of sex trafficking and prostitution. I just wanted to start off first by saying people usually hear sex trafficking or prostitution. And usually when they hear the word sex trafficking, they think about women from other countries, foreign women. She's sex trafficked because she's from India, she's from Asia, wherever she is from. And when they think of prostitution, or we call them prostituted women, they think of American women, domestic women that are involved. And why do we say prostituted rather than prostitute? Because we feel that prostitution is something that happens to her. And she doesn't necessarily have any control over what happens to her. Once she goes into that room with that individual, or once she jumps in that car, whatever means she's involved, whatever system that she's in, she doesn't always have the control, meaning she doesn't always call the shots. Whoever it is, that John that's in that room with her calls the shots. So we call her a prostituted woman. Right now, what's happening kind of in, I'm going to say the United States, but specifically Minnesota, the average age of entry in the United States is between 12 and 14 years old. And our youngest client at Breaking Free happens to be 12 years old. So you have to think about, what do you do when you get a little 12-year-old girl that comes into your office that's been bought and sold over and over again? Was she sex trafficked? Was she prostituted? She was both. Because the common denominator between the two is both categories of women are being bought and sold. See, prostitution is about a sex act. It's about individuals paying another individual to have sex with them. And so because Breaking Free is right now one of the only agencies in the country that provides permanent housing for women, we get referrals from all over the country to take women and girls into our housing program. So we have taken women from other countries into our program, as well as the United States. And the one thing that they both have in common, again, is that they've both been bought and sold over and over again. That's a common denominator between the two. What domestic women tell us is that they average probably between about 7 to 10 tricks or guys a day. What we've heard from foreign women is that their average is about probably between 15 and 25 guys a day. So we have to look at it. It's the act of sex. What happens to a woman? What happens to a girl, again, when she has to service that many customers every day? I want to say just a very little bit about myself and why I am so passionate about this, because at the age of 18, I myself got involved in the sex industry. Not of my free will, because I didn't really know what was happening at that particular time, and I don't have a lot of time to really break it down. But in my state where I lived, after I graduated in the early 70s, I had got accepted into a college, me and a girlfriend of mine, and there were ads in the paper at this particular time saying dancers needed, make $1,000 a week. So we're both 18 years old. We both dance. It didn't seem like anything different to us. It seemed like it would be okay. Easy money is what we thought. So we went on an interview. We were fully clothed, and we both got hired. And when we started off, we did start off doing just exactly what they said it would be, dancing. We were told to dance different ways and things like that. But it was pretty much overall dancing. After a couple weeks, they began to change things. They said, okay, now we want you to take your tops off. And we were both a little bit shy, and what's this all about? But they convinced us that our bodies were a work of art, that we were beautiful, that people would pay us a lot of money to see us dance still. So it went on, and eventually we both kind of got caught up in this. I always say that I was one of the fortunate ones because I didn't stay in it long. I was able to get out before a year. My girlfriend, they sent her on a whole nother track than I was. She was white. They sent her on a different track, and we just kind of lost contact with each other. I seen her for the first time in many years, about 5 years ago. Of course, she was in her 50s then. And I asked her, well, what happened to you? You just kind of disappeared. And she began to tell me about a guy that she happened to have met while involved in stripping. And this guy happened to be a pimp. And she told me that he died about a couple weeks ago. I said, he died a couple weeks ago. That's how she got out. This individual had her and other women working for him, and their only way of escape was through his death. This sounds maybe to some unbelievable, but these are the stories of the women that I work with on a daily basis. Breaking Free works with between 400 and 500 women and girls a year. 400 and 500 of them. That's quite a lot of women, right in the St. Paul, Minneapolis area. In Minnesota, it's estimated that there's anywhere between about 12 and 25,000 individuals. That's women, girls, men, boys, involved in the life of prostitution. And there's a couple agencies there that actually do direct services. Outside of Breaking Free, there's one other that does the work to try to really help them get out of the life. At Breaking Free, we believe that prostitution is violence against women and girls. We know that little girls don't daydream about becoming prostituted women when they grow up. If they do, there's something happening in their world that isn't right. We believe that prostitution is an extension of slavery, and I think people have heard that while they're here. We definitely believe it is an extension of slavery. It's about buying and selling human beings. It's a human rights violation. We don't believe that any woman, regardless of what area of the sex industry she's in, we believe that if she had viable options other than selling herself, that she would choose those. I say that, again, as an individual who has been involved. And I know that when I used to have to say to people, one thing is you keep it secret most often. It's very silent. You don't want everybody to know because of the shame that goes with it. But you wear a lot of hats when you're involved in prostitution, and you have to wear a lot of hats in order to survive. You have to put on a hat that says it's not so bad. I make a lot of money. You have to put on another hat when you go home, and you have to say, I'm going to work. I have to go to work tonight. I used to always tell family members, because I worked at night. So they thought I worked second shift, third shift. But you have to lie. It's about living a lie. That's what it becomes. You have to be tough. If you're not, you won't survive. You will not survive in the life of prostitution. I don't care if you call yourself the high class, the escort service working, the Craigslist, the back page. You have to be tough, and you have to tell a lot of different stories to a lot of different people, because that's the way the life works. Prostitution over history, throughout time, has been known as the oldest profession. Everybody calls it the oldest profession. Breaking Free calls it the oldest oppression against women and girls. We know that right now, 85% of women involved in prostitution has been sexually abused before the age of 18. Before the age of 18, and what the FBI says right now, when a young girl runs away from home, within 24 hours, she's more likely to be approached by someone who either wants to buy her or someone who wants to turn her out into prostitution within 24 hours. One of our clients from the East Coast that we just got sent to us was sexually abused in the home. And at the age of 12, she decided that she wanted to run away because for her, she said that would be the best thing for her to do. She'd be able to avoid or get away from all of the abuse, sexual abuse that was happening in her home. She said her neighbor pulled up and asked her if she needed a ride, and of course she said yeah. But she said it, she was 12 years old. She said it because she thought this individual was going to help her, that she would be able to tell him what had been happening to her in the home, and he would rescue her. All in all, what happened is he ended up being her first paying customer. He took her to a place where a lot of kids hung out, introduced her to another guy. The guy took her home, he raped her all night. The next day, he took her back to that same place and sold her to another guy. And what did she say? She said, I can't be sold. You know, what a 12-year-old, this is way blowing her mind. She doesn't know how to think. She can't figure all of this out. So all in all, what happened was she went through 3 guys throughout her life. When she came to Breaking Free, she was 27 years old. And when I picked her up at the airport and had the opportunity to talk to her, and she told me everything that had happened to her, I looked at her and I said, you know, I'm really sorry that that happened to you. That shouldn't have happened. And she looked at me like, what is wrong with you? She said, what are you talking about? She said, I just figured this is my destiny in life. We have to think about destinies. We all have destinies in life. We all have dreams of things that we want to do. But for an individual to feel like this is her destiny, to be bought and sold over and over and over again, it was like a dagger going through my heart when she said that. 27 years old. They found her in an abandoned building on the East Coast, totally nude, hung up on the ceiling, penetrated with different objects, beat badly and left for dead. This is not unusual. It is definitely not unusual, and it is very common for prostituted women to be so deeply in violent situations. We feel that the same tactics of power and control that keep women trapped in their abusive relationships are the same tactics that keep prostituted women trapped in their abusive relationships. So then you say, well, what if she doesn't have a pimp? Because all women don't have pimps that are involved in prostitution. See, what we believe at Breaking Free is just not okay to buy anybody. A woman, a girl, a man. And we do have to look at what happened during historical slavery of African Americans in this country. It did end, and there were some slaves that worked in the big house. They weren't as directly in contact with some of the other environments that the slaves who worked in the field worked. So when they were talking about freedom, not all of them agreed with freedom. They didn't think their lot was that bad in life. But slavery still ended, or we thought. It's about the numbers. It's about the bigger group. I'm sure that when they discussed it, should we end it, should we keep it, they had to consider the masses that were saying, no, I want out, this is violence, this hurts. When we think about prostitution, and we think, should it be legal? Should it be, her free choice, whatever? We have to think of the masses. Yesterday we were told that there were 15,000 women over in India that were being worked with, I'm sorry, I forgot your name. Rugia. She talked about the masses. I'm talking about the masses. We have to think on behalf of the masses when we think about ending this. That's what counts. The masses are saying this. I have only worked with, and I'm telling you, I've been working in this area since 1989. And I can count on one hand the number of women who told me they really like this. I want to do this. It's a life goal of mine to stay involved in this, to have sex 5, 10 times a day with different individuals. 5 women. All 5 of them were asking me to refer them to some kind of therapist because they couldn't understand why they were feeling so bad all the time. They couldn't understand why they didn't seem to be able to function in normal, healthy groups with other people. But they were still saying that they enjoyed prostitution, 5 of them, and they did make a lot of money. There is a lot of money to be made, but I keep going back to what are the masses saying? What are the masses of women and girls, not just here in the United States, all over the world, saying about prostitution? Over 60% of the women that we work with at Breaking Free are African American women. They're African American women. And yes, we know that they're being more targeted. We had 2 women that came into us not long ago, a white woman, a black woman, both worked together. The police pulled them over, made them both get in the police car. And he was telling them, kind of telling them both off when they got in there. You know, aren't you sick of selling your body, and just downing them like most people do with prostituted women? They think it's their fault. They're no good. They deserve what you tell them, what you tell them when you tell them off and such. So he told the black woman to get out of the car. And the white woman got just mad. She said, how are you going to let her go and keep me in this car and all of this and that? And he said, you should know better. He said, you should know better. You got more to live for. That's what she's about. He said, I'm going to take you to jail to teach you a lesson. Racism runs deep, even in prostitution. It's in the fabric of our country. Some people don't see it when you talk about prostitution. Everybody thinks everything is kind of even. There's nothing good, even if you're not a woman of color, there's nothing good about being bought and sold 5 and 10 times a day. What are the options for women? Women who have been sexually abused, women who haven't. Why do they choose to get into prostitution? In my opinion, it doesn't matter, because it shouldn't exist. It just shouldn't exist. So what do we have to do as a country? Sometimes I say, well, you know, I think there might be a revolution or something in order to end this form of violence against women. But what do we have to do? This is a multi-billion-dollar industry, prostitution, the demand for it. Multi-billion dollars in our country. That says a lot. That says a whole lot about the women and the girls and the boys. Who are the individuals that are purchasing women and girls? And Breaking Free has what we call an offenders prostitution program. It's a John school. Men who are arrested for soliciting women and girls into prostitution are court-ordered to our program. Who are they? The majority of them are white men. Their income is between $45,000 to about $70,000 a year. We've had doctors come through. We've had lawyers come through. We've had just your everyday dad, brother, uncle come through. One of the questions they get asked is, how many of you are married? And I'm telling you, just about every one of them are married. Just about the whole group raises their hand. What did you tell your wife? Where did you tell her you were going today? Working overtime. Going fishing with the guys. The part of the day that changes, we hope changes, the hearts of some of the men is when they hear the survivors speak. When the women speak and talk about how they got involved and how they felt when they were being bought. What we want to say is 100% of the women, 100% of the women we work with are somebody's mother, somebody's sister, daughter, child, and a good majority of them have children. So what we say about prostitution in the United States, we just have to end it. We got to quit calling it a form of slavery or extension of slavery if we're not going to treat it like that. We have to end it, all of it. It should never be an option for anyone. And how do we do that? By working together, working with our legislators, getting bills changed, speaking up when we need to speak up. That's how we end it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vednita. All right, our next speaker is Crystal DeBoise, who is a licensed social worker with 11 years of experience assisting survivors of gender violence. She's currently the director of social services at the Urban Justice Center's Sex Workers Project in New York City. The Sex Workers Project provides comprehensive legal and social services to trafficked people and sex workers. Crystal founded one of the first anti-trafficking programs in the United States at the New York Association for New Americans in 2001. Prior to that, she provided counseling services to victims of violence in a substance abuse clinic in the Bronx, was a housing specialist for survivors of domestic violence, and worked in the public school system. She works with clients and systems eclectically using a harm reduction approach that respects the rights of all people to therapeutic care. Welcome.
Good afternoon. We have the distinct pleasure of being the post-lunch panel. So I hope your digestion's going well. Are you still awake? We should have coffee here probably. Thank you to Paula and Smith for inviting me. It's been really a pleasure to speak to the staff here and the students, and I had to revise my entire outline because usually when I speak at a college, people don't know much, and so I do a kind of a 101. And after last night, speaking to so many students, I thought you all are really brilliant and thinking about the issues, and I was impressed, and so I came up with a few different things to say. I work at the Sex Workers Project. The Sex Workers Project has been around for 11 years, and we started because when the human trafficking issue started to gain traction, we felt like, our founder felt like we really didn't want to leave behind the voices of sex workers, and she was very intelligently felt that we have to look at the entire field of sex work and understand what's happening here holistically. And so we work under a model where we look at it as people enter the sex industry by choice, circumstance, or coercion. And our clients, we work with about 100 clients at a time, and we've worked with hundreds over the years. And they come from all three of these areas of entry into the sex industry. So by choice, meaning they had other choices and they chose sex work. Circumstance, meaning they were at the end of their rope, they didn't feel they had many options, they were struggling, and therefore they did sex work. And coercion, meaning they literally had no choice, they were forced and human trafficked into sex work. And we use the federal definition of human trafficking when we work. And part of that is because we have a law program as well as a social service program. And we are the only legal office, the only law program in the nation dedicated to people working in the sex industry. So we do utilize the legal definitions. Part of that is because a lot of our work is getting people immigration options who've been trafficked, and also other needs that they need filled legally. So yeah, the Sex Workers Project does legal services. We also do social services, non-time limited therapy, case management, social work. And we are in an agency that has several other programs that deal with things like homelessness, veterans issues, human rights issues, LGBT youth. So we draw on all of those, our colleagues in the building, to try to really provide a very holistic place for people to get services. An example of, so we see our work in terms of 4 prongs feeding each other. Our work with clients kind of grounds the work. We look at, before I go into that, I want to mention one thing that I was going to start with. A lot of people who work at Sex Workers Project are former sex workers themselves, and I wanted to bring up the story of Melissa Petro. Has anyone heard of Melissa Petro? About a year ago, she was a teacher in the Bronx, a beloved English teacher, and she was also a writer and published things occasionally. And she wrote an essay about experiences she had had as an escort several years before. One of the administration of the school saw this essay online, and she was immediately fired, and she will probably never be able to work in the school system again. I bring that up to let you know that when we talk about the voices of sex workers are missing, I don't necessarily mean that they're not here in the room. I just mean that it's dangerous for your future and for a lot of reasons to identify yourself as a sex worker. And so I hear a lot of discussion, and I want to just put that out there, that sometimes you are hearing the voice of a sex worker, but that person isn't going to go on record as saying, I'm a sex worker, I'm a former sex worker, because it's simply not safe for them in lots of reasons, but also very dangerous for their career and whatever they choose to do. It's not a protected title. So you can get fired for having been a sex worker from any job that you have, and blackballed out of any industry that you want to go in. So I just wanted to bring that up, something that was on my mind. So we have 4 prongs in the program, and each one sort of feeds into the other. The first is the direct service work, meeting people's needs in social services, therapy, and legal services where they are. The next prong is research. About every 2 years, we undertake a research project, and we look at what the trends are, what people are coming through the door, what they're saying, what questions we really have. And so, for instance, our last research project was about trafficking from Mexico to the United States. And it's because we had a lot of clients who were trafficked from Mexico to the US. And so we did a research project to talk to them and learn more about their experiences. And it's all on our website, sexworkersproject.org, if you want to take a look at that. Other research projects we have done that have come out of the experiences of working with clients include one on outdoor sex work, one on indoor sex work, and one on raids and the effect of police raids on clients. And we interviewed them, what was it like for you to be arrested? And that one I think is particularly shocking to people. What is the impact of the criminal justice system on their lives? We look at our research, and we use our research and our work with clients to develop our policy points. And we say, what's going on out there that's really affecting people that we could change? What laws are damaging people's chances, are interfering with people's well-being, are hindering their human rights? And we sort of go after those laws or write those laws that we think need to exist, or the policies that we think need to change. So our most recent really big win was we had a lot of clients who had been arrested for prostitution, and up to 7, 8, 9 times before they exited a trafficking situation. So they exited a trafficking situation with a major arrest record that was preventing them from working in several different fields, working with children, working with law enforcement. They had to disclose the arrest to any job that they got, and this was turning out to be a major hindrance in them moving forward. So we wrote a law called the Vacating Convictions Law, advocated for it, and got it passed. So now in New York, if you were trafficked, you can get your record vacated of all relating charges. So that's an example of the kind of policy work that we do and we think is important, and it's directly born out of the experience and the voices of our clients. So a lot of people have asked me, so people come forward, and what do you do? How do you actually sit with people, and what do you do? And we use something called a joining approach. And if there's any social work or psychology students here, they might have heard of this before. We kind of radically be with people where they're at. We don't make any demands on people's lives in order to get care. We don't demand that they disclose things. We don't have lengthy intakes. We don't ask yes and no. We don't ask questions that they have to answer. They can give us any name they want. They don't have to give ID. There are very few barriers to entering the program. And we don't have any demands, essentially. This may sound like common sense, but it's actually rare. Most social service programs, for instance, if you're going for substance abuse treatment, they demand that you stop using substances. And if you go into programs that are set up to help sex workers, a lot of them insist that you no longer are doing sex work, have no contact with your boss, your boyfriend. And that seems to be really hard for people, especially if that's their only support system that they've had for a long time. And they need a lot of time to end those relationships or change those relationships. And what happens if you make a demand is that they just disappear if they're not ready to meet the demand that you make. And this is also called harm reduction. So what works? I like to use an example of, imagine that you have a problem and you go to speak to a friend about your problem. This is what happened. So let's say, my landlord is bugging me, whatever. And I go to talk to the friend, and I'm trying to get the story out, and the friend keeps saying, have you called the da-da-da-da? Have you called the advocacy center? And you just want to kind of like, I'm trying to get my story out, and you really don't like that sort of inserted all of the suggestions. It kind of drives you crazy. This is a human nature type of thing, and we try not to do that. We try to be with people, listen, and what works is really validating, listening, having someone feel they've been heard, and believing them. Whatever they say their experience is, believing it. Similar to what we do when people have experienced other rape or domestic violence. And then building the relationships in this way over time, and from that strong base of support, people can make the best decisions for themselves in their lives. And then we have to respect those decisions. So human trafficking, I'm going to move into the coercion part, since this is a conference on human trafficking. I'm going to set aside the people who enter by choice or circumstance and talk about coercion. Human trafficking is the use of force, fraud, or coercion to extract labor for cheap or for free. And as advocates, we have tended to separate labor trafficking and human trafficking, and I think this is a big mistake. One reason is, under the law, sex trafficking is very narrow. It only includes a very classic exchange of sex for money in prostitution. It doesn't include dancing at strip clubs, by the way. It doesn't include a lot of other sexualized labor. It only includes a very narrow interaction under the law. So by only talking about sex trafficking, we leave out, even if we're only interested in sexual exploitation, we still leave out a vast, I think, majority of people who are sexually exploited under trafficking. I've worked with both survivors of all kinds of trafficking, and I can tell you for sure that people who are trafficked into households, who have been working isolated in households, are almost always sexually exploited. They often have little or no contact with the outside world, very little chance to escape, and their lives are horrifying. And often those clients or those victims are much, much younger than those who enter for sex trafficking. So I've worked with people in labor trafficking, saying trafficked as young as 4 years old to be household servants, and that happens on more regularly with labor trafficking. So I want to just bring that up in terms of why are we making this separation, and why are we leaving those people out of the dialogue. I think it's really important to not forget about them in their stories, even if we're only interested in sexual exploitation. I'm not talking about all of the other aspects of labor exploitation that occur. So when we're assessing for human trafficking, so how do you know if someone's trafficked or not? People don't walk in saying, I was trafficked. We ask the story in an open-ended kind of way. We try to get a sense with the person, understand what they experienced, and we often ask what would have happened if you had left. And that's sort of and it's difficult under the law, especially with immigration law, to determine if someone was trafficked, if they qualify for the visa that exists for trafficked people. Or if they're born in the US and don't need immigration, do they qualify for, in New York, we have a state program that you have to qualify as a victim of trafficking to be in that state program. And so it's not a really clear line, but if the person says, if I had left, there would have been grave danger to myself or my family, then it's probably trafficking. We try not to conflate human trafficking and smuggling, which is something I don't hear happening as much, but it used to happen. People used to think that it meant, when I was smuggled across the border, that meant trafficking, and it's a really different thing, although that often turns into trafficking, but it's a different crime. So I wanted to talk about why we feel it's important to include sex workers in the fight against human trafficking. First of all, identification and trust building. As we said, no one's walking in saying, "Hi, I'm a victim of human trafficking." People come to our program because they've heard that this is a safe place to go if you're working in the sex industry. We cast a very wide net, and anyone who's working in the sex industry or is profiled as a sex worker, a lot of transgender individuals are arrested simply, we call walking while trans. You're arrested and in charge of prostitution. They're welcome into the program. And so in terms of identification of trafficked people, often it takes, I've worked with people for a year or months before we really build the kind of trust that it would take to talk about the situation that they're in. And therefore, if we don't welcome all people working in the industry in, we don't catch the people who it takes a month or 2 months. If you have to tell me the first, which a lot of programs do, you have to tell me in the first intake whether you were trafficked or not, or give me the strong indication of whether you were trafficked or not. Most of our clients would not have made it past that initial interview. And we also have to think about all of the different cultures and how some people are more forthcoming than others, and it's culturally inappropriate for many people to talk about really intense experiences that they've had the first time they meet someone. So for people knowing that we are the place that you can go without judgment, that's a major help for identification. Number 2 reason why it's important to include sex workers in the fight against human trafficking. Who's in a better position than sex workers to look around the sex industry and see who's being mistreated, to offer them help, and to bring them to the right place? Nobody. Nobody's in a better position than sex workers and their clients to assist victims of human trafficking. However, they are completely left out of the dialogue. They're not consulted. They're not trained in identification. I was in a meeting I'm in a working group with the NYPD, and I have 2 things to say about that. First thing is they go over cases, and without respect to the people's privacy or anything, they talk about all of the cases that they've seen that are trafficking. And in a small group, ask for assistance, help, or we talk about those cases. In the last meeting I went to, they talked about 7 or 8 cases, and in every single one, the person who had helped the trafficking survivor escape and brought them to the police or help us, this is problematic, so I'm just gonna, we can talk about that later if you want, but who had helped the person become aware of the police was their customer in every single case. We can't leave those people out of the dialogue. If we are serious about finding trafficked people, we cannot ignore the people who are visiting them every single day, many of whom do not want to sleep with a trafficked person or an underage person, who are looking to have a good time and want an adult willing woman and don't actually want a trafficked person, and who actually help trafficked people leave the situation. It's a large percentage of how people get out. Now we can get into some other difficult issues in terms of saving and the rescue mentality and how sometimes they become the boyfriend and domestic violence. It gets very complicated. But my point is, let's not leave them completely out of the dialogue. Now, I want to mention also that our casting a wide net and serving anybody that comes through the door is not cost effective. And one of the reasons that a lot of human trafficking programs have to do this, assessment in the first few sessions and identify the person as a victim is because their funding depends on it. So I don't want to be too hard on them about that. I really understand those restrictions. So I have 2 minutes left. I want to end with a couple of stories to sort of contextualize of some of the clients I've worked with over the years. The first one I want to talk about is Anna. She was from a developing country, and when she was 8 years old, her mother was approached by a diplomat and offered to take her to the United States as a household servant, and not to the United States, take her to another country as his household servant, and in exchange, the family would receive some sort of payment. The family was strapped. There were ill people in the family, and the mother took him up on this. She didn't get out until she was 27. She worked in several countries, never went to school, didn't learn to read or write, was raped repeatedly by the diplomat and his friends, tried to kill herself when she was a teenager, went to a hospital, and tried to tell them what was happening, what she was trying to escape, was ignored, drugged up, and sent back. I talk about her story because it is a labor trafficking story, and it's also one of the she had some of the most severe mental health consequences of anyone I had ever met. She also recovered beautifully and now works in a professional field and has learned to read and write, is doing phenomenal. But it's labor trafficking. Next client I want to tell you about is Jessica. Jessica was also from a developing country, got trafficked in a very typical way into prostitution when she was 16, hated it, hated the fact that she didn't have her autonomy, hated the fact that she didn't have her freedom and that she was separated from her child. Escaped when she was 21, didn't know what to do, got her child back. Had to somehow survive. Went back into prostitution with a few of her friends as this is the circumstance situation. Was force, became circumstance. Was terrified of getting arrested. Asked me, can I help her get a straight job? She was terrified of getting arrested all the time and going to jail and again being separated from her child. She got this straight job. I helped her get a job as a cleaning person, cleaning offices, which is all she qualified for with her education level, etc. She got her check 2 weeks later, came into my office as angry as any client has ever been with me, slammed the check on my desk and said, "What the hell is this? Do you know how hard I worked? Do you know how I didn't see my son for these 2 weeks? What is this?" She decided to remain in sex work on her own and is raising her son herself instead of putting him in substandard daycare, and feels that was definitely the best decision for her. I have one more maybe later, but I think I'm out of time. Thank you so much for listening. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Crystal. Thank you. Our third speaker is Kelly Dorsey, who is the Executive Director of Different Avenues, a membership-based reproductive justice organization in Washington, D.C. that works with girls, women, and trans people of color who have life experiences in street-based economies and or the criminal justice system. She's worked in harm reduction for over 10 years, conducting, developing, and implementing various types of sex work and needle exchange programs. She's organized on human rights, focusing on issues that impact women of color, transgender people, people currently and previously incarcerated, and people engaged in street economies. Welcome.
Thank you. I don't know where you pulled that from. I know I didn't send you anything. Thank you so much. It's wonderful being here. And wow, you guys have a really diverse panel. So one thing that I'll say about Different Avenues is we are a membership-based organization. We don't actually consider ourselves a social service organization. We are an organizing project. And we are an affiliate of Insight, Women of Color Against Violence. So to set the stage to know probably a little bit more about my perspective. I just wanted to say a couple of things. I heard some really wonderful stories from the previous people who spoke. And so some of the work that we do nationally is we go around the country debunking anti-trafficking facts that people have that are not facts. And we ask people to look at data the way you would look at any other data and make sure it's scientifically collected and peer-reviewed, because a lot of things that come out are not. So for example, I heard you mention a little bit earlier that the average age of entry is 12 to 13. That is everywhere, but if the average age was 12 or 13, that means that some people started when they were 1. It's just not realistic. There's a Insight sister that I have named Emi Koyama, who I would suggest you guys go and read her stuff, and she debunks a lot of the anti-trafficking facts, and her website is emiisms.org. So as an Insight affiliate, a bunch of women of color and indigenous women got together to talk about what does trafficking and sex work and sex trade mean to us, and it's people who have life experience in the sex trade, including trafficking and exploitation. And I want to separate those out because there's been something that's happened in this country where there doesn't have to be movement for trafficking anymore. And I think it's a problem. And so we actually say that there can be exploitation, there can be pimps, but that is not necessarily a trafficking situation. A trafficked person is always exploited, but an exploited person is not always trafficked. So we try to really get into detail when we talk about who are we talking about, because when we use an overarching term to talk about people, what we do is we cannot comprehensively help them whatever way they want us to. The other thing that I want to talk about briefly, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over some legislation with you and some of the unintended consequences. But before that, this group Fuse for women of color and indigenous women and trans people who have life experience in the sex trades, we talked about what does it mean to use the terminology modern day slavery and abolition, especially in the US when we have such a rich history in slavery and we can still see the benefits of slavery today. And so we think that it's not appropriate to use that. It takes away from African and indigenous people's histories of chattel slavery. And let's be very real that the United States has a rich history of moving somebody to a country to exploit their labor using force, fraud, or coercion. That is our history. And the reason why we care about it now is because there's these really cute white faces that were put on poster boards or billboards, and we're afraid that people are gonna be trafficked from the suburbs. And it's not reality. So I just wanted to talk about that a little bit. It's not modern day slavery. Slavery was socially condoned. It was government sanctioned. We were 3/5 of a person, and it was passed from one generation to another. So I just, specifically in the United States, and I'm not talking about how things happen globally, because globally trafficking is a very different situation. But in the United States, it's not appropriate to use modern day slavery or abolition when talking about anti-trafficking movement or trafficking within a US context. So I'm just gonna talk to you a little bit about some of the legislations we've worked on and why we accidentally tripped into trafficking. We did not want to get into it, but we had to because in 2010 in DC, I was approached by a lawyer at the Public Defender Service because they had been working on a trafficking bill for years with Polaris, and they hadn't actually brought sex worker groups or groups that work with people of color, groups who work with youth who are criminalized. They didn't bring us to the table. So I actually met with, it was really crazy legislation. I worked with 6 attorneys across the country, including some at Sex Workers Project who are really phenomenal. But I'm gonna tell you some of the impact of DC's law. So DC's legislation criminalizes Good Samaritans or businesses that harbor, transport, or provide for a person we think may be trafficked. So the thing about DC's law that's different is a lot of times laws say you have to know, but in DC it's know or in reckless disregard. And so what that means is I may think that the person's trafficked, and if I don't take them to the police, I am then a trafficker. So the way this plays out in DC is a Good Samaritan or a business, including nonprofits, cannot drive a person they think may be trafficked to the store, laundromat, give them a ride, or they'll be transporting that person. A person or an organization, including nonprofits, cannot give a person they think may be trafficked a place to stay because they'll be harboring that person. A person or organization, including nonprofits, cannot give food or a stipend to a person they think may be trafficked because we'll be providing for that person. The problem here is we work with a lot of people under the age of 18 who trade sex. Are they trafficked? Under the law, they're trafficked. Do we consider them trafficked? No. Do they consider themselves trafficked? No. But under the law, they are trafficked. And I remember, we had this board staff retreat, and I said to my board member, who's a lawyer, I was like, well, DC's really progressive. The likelihood that they're gonna actually even come after us is small. She's like, they're not so progressive that they didn't pass this law. I was like, well, that's kind of true. So we ended up having a board staff retreat, and one of my board members came and brought the girls donuts. And we realized through the retreat, when it was just the board, that my board member then was at risk of being considered a trafficker, or under the law in DC, she was considered a trafficker. So then we made a decision at different avenues where I am the only person that's allowed to give the girls a ride, that's allowed to give them stipend, food. That way there's only one person who's at risk. But where this becomes unfair is I want to transition out of my job. So who do we hire and say, hey, do you want to work here? You may be at risk for being a trafficker. We can't. And so we're considering, do we keep our local project open? So another big piece around this legislation that's really complicated was data collection. And under this legislation, every single prostitution arrest is considered a trafficking arrest. Yes, so there is all of this data that says that we have a bunch of people who have been trafficked, and the next step is we need money for trafficking. Our police need money, the system needs money, we have to save people, but there's not actually a lot of people who have been sex trafficked in DC. The data just looks that way. So another piece of legislation that I worked on recently was Prop 35. I don't know if any of y'all know about Proposition 35 in California. So somebody sent me an email about Prop 35. I'm considered to be somewhat of an expert, and I was like, oh, let me just call my reproductive justice sisters in California and see, just get them to not sign on to it. And amazingly, all of the women of color organizations did not sign on to it. Then it turned into a campaign. Which it was a little bit much. So what ended up happening, and I'm going to tell you this law did pass, but we ended up working with Black Women for Wellness, and I'm going to tell you pieces of the law, but the amazing thing about the law is once we started talking, people were against it, newspapers started coming out against it, 3 organizations, anti-trafficking organizations who had signed on, pulled their names, but we only had a month and a half, there was but so much we can do. And when it's called California's Against Sexual Exploitation Act, who is not gonna sign on to that? I wanna sign on to that, except for I understand it, you know? So, some of the things that happen in this law, and it just on March 1st became enacted, and they're trying to figure out what they can roll back now, but And I will say that every party that was involved in getting this legislation passed who did not understand this legislation is now trying to fix this legislation. And some people can't even say it because they were leading the pack, but a millionaire, so the person who led this charge, his name is Chris Kelly, he's a privacy officer at Facebook, billionaire, put millions of dollars into this campaign. A person should not put millions of dollars into this campaign. And I will just say, before I get into this, that for us, when we're working on trying to reduce criminalization of our communities, the marriage between feminists and the religious right is the marriage of hell, and that is the anti-trafficking movement in the United States. So some examples of Prop 35. So this law puts young people who are homeless or using survival strategies, they can be charged as traffickers for sharing space, food, and resources. If a person is homeless and they're staying with a friend and they buy some wine and they drink together and that person and their friend goes out and sex works, they have put that person under coercion because they're drunk, they're intoxicated, and that person who is just staying at their friend's house who's a sex worker is considered a trafficker. And this one is a little bit more tricky. This one I talked with an attorney about. So if a boy under the age of 18, if a boy and a girl go out, and they go to a movie and the boy pays and he asks to see a girl's breasts and he promises not to show anybody, and he gets home and he sends a picture to everybody, he is considered a trafficker. Is he messed up? Yes. Totally inappropriate, but he is not a trafficker. And I think that the problem with some of these laws is they're so broad that what ends up happening is we don't actually help those who are trafficked. We can't be so broad. The other thing this law does is it creates a hierarchy between people who are trafficked into the formal sector, which I consider migrant farm workers, domestic servitude, factories, and people who are trafficked into informal sectors like the sex trade or drug trade. So it puts hierarchy on people who are trafficked into commercial sex work. The problem is we've then just invisibilized and shut down the voices of people who are trafficked into other forms of labor and experience sexual violence. That their story never gets told, and it's super problematic. I'm so glad to be here, and I would say next year if you have this again, you should definitely have somebody here who knows about labor trafficking. You know what I mean? Because the voice needs to be in the room. So an interesting part of Prop 35 is they have these huge fines up to $1 million. It's really crazy, and that seems like a good thing. Who doesn't want to fine a trafficker? Except for the fines are so high, the person who is trafficked cannot seek financial, they can't sue the person who's trafficked them because the fines are so high. So now they have no legal recourse to go against the person who's trafficked them. So that's one of the big issues with this. There's also, I should say, and this is one of the more controversial ones. So if a person says that they're trafficked and they identify a person, the person who is in court as the defendant is not allowed to bring up the person's history of sex work. In some cases, this could be great, right? But what if the person has a 15-year history in sex work and they've been arrested? Let's say, two misdemeanors equal a felony. They don't want, so they name somebody. And that person cannot, so now the defendant is not allowed to talk about the history. There's a lot of coercion that happens with the police department and why people admit to things that are not true and say that people traffic them. And that's what we're finding with the girls that I work with sister organizations that I work with around the country, is they feel like they have to say they're trafficked because they get services, they don't get arrested. Services should not be coerced. They should not be mandated. We should have, what people need, what young people need, the people that we work with, they want job training, jobs. Most importantly, jobs. I don't know if you guys know about job training. There's a lot of job training and no jobs. You know what I mean? I know people who look for jobs hardcore, and there's only jobs, specifically in DC, it's considered to be a place for where people can get jobs, but only a certain type of person. And so we really have to start looking at the root causes: racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia. The number one thing I think is economic justice, because that's one of the main reasons, or the number one reason, that people are trading sex for survival, or they're being exploited for money, or they're being trafficked. So one of the other things that I'm going to hit, and I know you guys had something, I missed it, I barely made it here. I had the craziest trip. But I want to talk about Craigslist. And I know you guys had something earlier on technology. But I want to talk to you all about some of the impacts of shutting down Craigslist and what that meant for other people. Okay. So Craigslist, I don't know if y'all know this, Craigslist originally started, they were free at first. I don't know if y'all know that their erotic services section was free. But after it increased tax from federal agencies and hardcore feminist religious right organizers, Craigslist agreed to start collecting numbers and charging $25 for their erotic services ad. Then a big campaign came. They're like, "Oh my God, you're making so much money off of trafficked girls and women." And they're like, "But we weren't charging money before. We're charging money because you told us to charge money. And yeah, we can see what we understand what you're saying, but it's not really that." So then they shut down their erotic services. So let me tell you what the impact was. Campaigning took away a resource that gave girls another choice on how they first engage with clients. So for people that don't know about sex work, there has to be some engagement to figure out money. But this is the thing, is you get a vibe. You're like, that person's sketchy, I'm not going. That was taken away from girls, women, trans people, men, boys who are working. That choice was taken away. And that piece of safety was taken away. Also, campaigning against Craigslist took away a person's access to no-cost or low-cost advertising, moving people back to the streets. So while people are like, oh my God, there's all of these girls, and I can talk to you and debunk how people came up with the average age of girls on Craigslist. It is not accurate. The data is completely incorrect, and it was a campaign that was so harmful based on data that's incorrect. I don't know, it's so crazy. The reason why I'm talking about this is because I'm hoping, as people are going after Backpage, and I don't know what you guys were talking about today as it related to technology, but that you keep an open mind about the unintended consequences of shutting down a place like Craigslist, which means that poor, low-income, people of color, youth, people that need a little bit more safety don't have it anymore. And so the stories that you hear the painful narratives. People in the sex trade, there's a variety of experiences. Some people are by choice, some people coercion. Each, sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. That's how sex goes anyways. And you know what I mean? There's like this range of experiences. Not every experience is the same. Not every sex worker experience is the same thing. And the sex workers' experiences are a variety. Even if it's a trafficked person, exploited person, that's anybody. There's not one story or a narrative, and when we boil it down to one simple story or narrative, a significant amount of voices get lost. So, I probably have 1 minute now. I would say that, what I ask people to do is to really be vigilant and to be really smart and savvy and to look at the anti-trafficking movement the same way you would look at any other thing. I feel like when it comes to, I do work in HIV/AIDS and needle exchange, and I would not expect, something that did not fly is, passing out syringes makes everybody a drug user. That doesn't work. We have data on that says it doesn't work. And people tried for years to say that that's it. I truly believe that the anti-trafficking movement and what's happening right now is the new drug war. We are rolling back policies as it relates to drugs, and we are now increasing policies as it relates to the sex trade. We're wrapping everybody in, service providers, friends, people who are staying at people's houses, every single young person who trades sex or is in street economy. Everybody is wrapped up and can be considered a trafficker, and we have to be very, very careful. And this is, and as we see the prison industrial complex decrease because of our drug laws, and we know that they're not scientific, we know that we cannot deal with drug issues via the criminal system. This is a new one, and let me tell you something. We will not be rolling back trafficking laws when they have a sex offense charged to them. And it's going to impact communities of color, black and brown men mostly, but also youth and women, because once you start arresting, that's it. And I know that you've probably experienced this, the amount of sex workers that get arrested for pimping. Now pimping is being conflated with trafficking. So just be very vigilant and smart and brilliant, like I know you guys are because you go to Smith. Thank you.
I just want to add one little thing. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but also I was in a meeting with that same meeting. This was the second thing I was going to say about that meeting with the NYPD after Craigslist got shut down, and they were the most pissed out of anyone that it got shut down because Craigslist was extremely helpful when there was an underage girl on Craigslist. Craigslist opened their books so that they didn't have to without subpoena. They were extremely cooperative in investigations, and they were the best friend of the NYPD in finding trafficked girls. The other places, which cost hundreds of dollars to advertise, are not. They're demanding subpoenas, whatever. So the NYPD was like, you guys screwed up. And I said, it wasn't me. I didn't screw up. But we really need to be careful of our well-intentioned actions.
All right, I'd like to open it up to questions. Yeah, Ruchira. Oh, we've got a microphone coming down.
This was just a fascinating discussion for me because I've traveled all the way from India to be here to listen to all of you. And Vednita I've heard before, Crystal I heard for the first time, and you. And some of the issues which I wanted to ask questions from, and any of you are free to answer, because I think all of you will have a piece of the answer, is that how in America, in the United States of America, is trafficking not defined as force, the act of force, fraud, and coercion for the purpose of exploitation? Because what I heard in your presentation was that somebody buying burgers for a traffic person would be considered a trafficker, but that's not true in Indian law or as the UN protocol, because it has to be for the purpose of exploitation. So if I was buying burgers for someone to be able to then rape them or exploit them, then I would be considered a trafficker, and then I would be subject to punishment or to be put through the criminal justice system. So I was a bit confused about that interpretation of the law, and I wanted to understand how did you come to that conclusion that anyone could be arrested under this law. That was one. The second was that you also talked about it being an economic justice issue, and that, of course, in India, we understand because the majority of the trafficked are poor, low caste, women, and many, very often even girls. So we do understand that they become part of the supply because they are poor, because they are girls, because they are low caste. But how is it an economic justice issue for men who buy them? Because they obviously have a little bit more extra money to be able to purchase a girl or a woman. And so what about that? And the third thing is that very often we talk about the face of the trafficking victim, and we talk about the 12-year-old girl. But I also think we need to talk about the 40-year-old woman as a survivor, and what happens to her. Because very often what we find is that in prostitution, as you grow older, your income comes down, you don't have any skills, and there's dependency on drugs and alcohol, and what happens then? And also yesterday and today there were questions asked in different sessions about transgender issues and the exclusion of people from transgender communities in terms of services, and to notice that they too are becoming victims of trafficking. This is happening in India in any case. And the issue is that I think that feminists need to align with the communities of transgender, because the situation sometimes is the same. They become the purchased, they become the sold and the bought. And how does a victim make the journey from the victim to survivor and then to leader or whatever? So these are the issues I think that I wanted to ask, because all of you have have direct experience dealing with these issues.
Okay, so under California's law, they actually define force, fraud, and coercion. It's actually force, fraud, coercion, and duress. And some of it includes reputational harm, hardship, under the influence. So it's very broad. And so what we're finding is that the federal statute is fine. It's very clear, but how it's being written on a state and local level is where the definition becomes overbroad. It's why in DC, my organization and me, it's why I'm considered to be a trafficker. How's an economic justice issue for men? That's a really good question. I don't necessarily think it's an economic justice issue for men unless they're working. So when I think about men, I think about men and boys who are in the sex trade, and it's an economic justice issue for them the same way as it would be for women, trans women, I should say trans people. Exclusion of transgender communities. The only thing that I would say is that under all of the new anti-trafficking legislations that are coming out, one of the biggest problems is they completely exclude transgender people and boys. it's as if trafficking only happens to girls and women, and so it's very different. I will also say that in DC, things are very different. We don't actually see trans girls or boys being trafficked. Primarily the people who are being trafficked are girls and women. And I will also say we don't see them being pimped either. We don't see them being exploited. They are usually working and in control and doing whatever they need to do. And that doesn't mean that they don't have other challenges, but having a pimp is not one of them that we're seeing locally. I don't know about you.
Are you familiar with Courtney's house in DC?
Mm-hmm.
Because you know that they do work with a lot of transgender boys.
Well, just to be very clear, I mean, this is where the definitions are very different, right? I don't consider everybody under the age of 18 a trafficked person. Mm-hmm. A trafficked person is somebody who has been moved to be exploited. That's my personal and organizational definition that I've worked with other people of color. So I think that's something that's very different. So I know that I mean, there's girls that I work with that have been a part of Courtney's house, but they don't consider themselves trafficked.
Yeah, they might not. But we look at trafficking, I'm just saying, for breaking free, she might be trafficked from St. Paul to Brainerd.
So in
Minnesota.
DC,
That's moving from one place to another. That is moving her from one city to another city.
and that
It doesn't
definitely
necessarily have to be
happens.
across the world.
I mean, no, it definitely it definitely happens. But but the law in DC says anybody and this federal statute says that anybody under the age of 18 is a trafficked person. That's one of the big changes in Prop 35. They were the only state that I know of that still said that people under the age of 18 still had rights. They just changed it to say anybody under the age of 18 is a trafficked person. I think that they were the only state left. But I don't consider everybody under the age of 18 who is trading sex a trafficked person. Sometimes it means they're trafficking themselves. There's nobody who's forcing them to trade sex. And I think that becomes a problem, especially when you look at the impact of the criminal justice system on communities of color and poor people. So.
I think for me, it just gets back to it.
I just want to add, when you said that sometimes people are selling themselves, and should they be considered trafficked victims? Now, this is again become a social justice issue, really, because for the person who's selling himself or herself, it is basically depends on their circumstances, and then we get into the debate that being considered a victim would give them better services or not. And you are saying that maybe not. Then what are the other options that person would have to change their circumstances?
Okay, I don't know. I'm going to let Crystal talk a little bit, but I just want to say that I don't necessarily want to change a person's circumstances. The way I work with girls and women and the way I've done it for over 15 years is I do what they want. So if they want something to change, they have to tell me what that is, and I can work with them and do that. But I don't assume that everybody that I see wants to get out of trading sex. Do you know what I mean? And so I think that there's a lot of assumptions about how the sex trade happens. And I think that one of the biggest forms of violence against people in the sex trade is the stigma that the rest of society puts on people in the sex trade. So, I don't know.
Yeah. I think we have a similar approach. Listen, be there, believe people, give them a base of support, ask them, what do you want to do? They might say, you know what, eventually I want to become a teacher, but right now I need to do this. And I said, okay, do you want to make a move? Like, do you need a referral to go on that teacher path while you do this? And do you need condoms for this? It's like where they are at. It's all that works. In my experience, that's the only thing that works in terms of really partnering with someone. So I just want to mention something about trans women. We have the Sex Workers Project we've always worked with trans women, but recently there have been an increase in arrests. And the way that Vice works in New York City is that they're not big enough to cover all places at all times. So they kind of rove around. And they target communities, and who knows how they make these decisions, but they're like, okay, let's really go after this group, or let's really go after that group. And right now they're really going after trans Latina women in Queens. Bunches of arrests. Doesn't matter if you're working or not working. If you're outside, we just responded to a call with 3 trans women. We're standing outside a gay bar. out having a good time, police just rode up while they were standing outside smoking or whatever, picked them up, arrested them for prostitution. So trans women, it's an employment option, but they also end up getting wrapped up in the prostitution debate, even if they never did sex work, because of the stigma. And also, people are encouraged by their public defenders to plead guilty, so then they have a record, and they often don't understand the immigration consequences of the record. So we have, this is a really big issue, and involves lifelong consequences. And I think it makes me hopeful that so many of you are bringing it up and are interested in exploring it. And we have a lot on our website about this, actually, at sexworkersproject.org.
I just would like to just say, because you said that there's a lot of assumptions of why and how people get involved in this, in the sex industry. And I know that, it's huge, but I'm basing what I know on fact of working with 500 women and girls a year, how they've gotten involved, what they tell me. And then when I think about the kids that we work with, they come in at 12 and 13, and I think of my own kids and my grandkids, and I say, you gotta tell me what you want. I wouldn't do that to my kids. Don't tell me what, I know that that's not what you need, what is good for you. So when we have a 13-year-old girl that comes into our organization that has been in a life of prostitution, and I ask her, well, what do you want? She's confused for one thing. She doesn't really know what she wants because her whole life has been scarred already, even before she got involved in prostitution. And she's coming, one thing she expects from us at Breaking Free is to try to give her a little bit of guidance. We can't force her to do anything, but we can tell her about what the bottom line is of the industry that she's working in. If she stays in there from 13 to 27 years old, we can tell her what can most likely happen to her, what her life will end up being. So we don't just, we work differently with the kids that come in, is all I'm saying. The kids that come in under 18, we have a different way of working with them. Grown women, we have a different way. We work with them differently than we would a 13-year-old girl. She's 27 years old coming in, and maybe she doesn't want to get out. We work with all women, whether they want to be in it or not. We don't turn any women down when they come to Breaking Free. All we do is talk about what we believe, that you deserve something better. There is a better way. You don't have to sell your body. And so you think, when we act like prostitution is this, she wants this, or we try to help people to understand it. One thing that I try to do is tell people it is about the sex act, and we can't take that sex act away. When you have to have sex with 1, 5, 10 people a day, it becomes torturous. It's not, it's not just sex like with your boyfriend or with your lover or something like that. It's a whole different, ball game. It's completely different than being with your lover. And we just think that women do deserve better, and that we need to just eliminate and be rid of the whole, we need other options. You talked about they need jobs. There's a lot of job training places, but no jobs. Well, why can't we put our energy into making jobs for people? How do we do that, rather than saying, go on back out there and continue to sell yourself? Continue to let people buy you. Continue to let people violate you. Why can't we put more energy into getting them a job and making things happen for them in that way?
I understand what you're saying, and we definitely have two different philosophies on how we work with young people. And I have been doing this for over 15 years and have worked with thousands of women, both in DC, Baltimore, and in Boston and northern Massachusetts. So I think that young people know what they want. We have said they should have access to birth control. We have talked about parental notification, and that, I should say feminists have thought that, young people should not have to notify their parents when it comes to abortion. And I think that, especially when I'm talking about young people who are in the system, who may be trading sex, is they have a lot of ideas. They're smart. They know what they need. And that's how I work with them. And if you talk to social workers at DYRS, they will say that the girls that come through different avenues are like, what happened? Because we don't actually put our opinions on them, we can't tell you how you feel during sex. It may be worse working 10 hours than McDonald's. I don't know. You have to tell me what's worse. I just am not sure. I also, it would be nice to smash capitalism, absolutely. That's not a reality right now. And I think that we have to acknowledge that sex work is good money. And I don't try to get into the debate of just people need jobs, because some people don't mind trading sex. Because once capitalism is smashed, does it mean that we're going to be against prostitution? No, people can do whatever they want to do with their bodies. You know what I mean? I don't know. And it's not for me to tell people how they feel. It's for me to ask them and to negotiate with them if they're not feeling good. But I can't tell people how they feel. You know, and I can't expect or assume that everybody's experience, even if it's similar, is the same. And I think that we do a disservice to young people, to girls, boys, trans people, if we just assume that. And we miss their stories. Let's just be very clear. We miss their stories. We invisibilize them. We tell them who they are. And it's not appropriate. At least at my organization, it's not appropriate. That's not how we work. And I know that we're considered kind of, out there. But
Hi. I'm sympathetic to your view that sex work should be viewed as any other kind of work as long as it's voluntary. But on the other hand, sex work is sex, and sex is legal between consenting adults, but not between an adult and a child. So if a minor consents, even entices an adult into a sexual relationship, that minor has been subjected to statutory rape. And it seems like statutory trafficking would also be a corollary or an analog to that. Can a minor traffic him or herself? And I would say, well, they should not be able to if they are minor.
I agree.
This actually has come up most in immigration law because under the immigration law, if you're under 18 and you have been arrested for prostitution, you automatically qualify for a T visa. However, to get a T visa, you have to report your crime to law enforcement. So when you go to law enforcement and they say, who's the bad guy? And you can't come up with a name, it becomes a big problem. So they then have to overcome to get the visa that they're entitled to under the law, they have to overcome the obstacle, explain to law enforcement how exactly are they under the law a victim of trafficking, yet there's no trafficker. And so as an advocate for the client, of course I want him or her to get the visa. But also as an advocate for the client, I don't want him or her to be implicated in any other crime when they're going forward to law enforcement. Yet, they've trafficked themselves. It's this sort of bizarre legal thing, actually, in my opinion.
I think that's a good way to put it. I think it's definitely a bizarre legal thing. What I learned when working in DC's legislation, I learned way too much about law. This one I learned from Sienna, her legal co-director. When somebody under the age of 18 has sex with somebody over the age of 18, whether or not, because the girls in my office, they all look over 18. A person would never be able to tell. But it doesn't matter. The adult is actually subject to a law called strict liability, which means you should have known. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if they showed you a license that had 23. It doesn't matter. You should have known. And I think that's one of the very interesting things about Prop 35 is California was the only state that said, well, maybe you just don't know. You know what I mean? And I don't think that people can traffic themselves. Trafficking involves exploitation. Can people exploit themselves? If I talk to the girls and trans folks at my office, would they consider themselves exploited? No. Do they exploit themselves? No, they do what they want to do. You know what I mean? That's what they're saying. They do what they want to do. And so I think that it's very, I don't know, I don't want to say adultism. It's really, it's very U.S. based to think that, it's not just U.S. based, we think that young people don't have any common sense. And let me tell you, to survive on the streets, you gain some, even if you didn't have any. And they make choices. And they actually also make choices to be safer. And some of that might be trading sex instead of dealing drugs. I don't think they can traffic themselves.
I just want to say about a support group that we had. We have them every week with the girls. And one thing we ask them to do is talk about what they liked. What do they like about being bought and sold, about prostitution? And they say a lot of things. I like riding in nice cars. I like meeting men with a lot of money. And I listen to all of that. And then I say, well, now I want you to tell me about prostitution. The actual act. What do you like about that? When you take your pants off, your panties off, and he comes inside you. The looks on their face. And I say, and then he leaves, and then somebody else comes in. Or you go back out to the streets, or you go back on back page, whatever you're doing, however you're doing it. I want you to talk to me about nothing but that act. That's all. Everything else is not the sex act. The sex act is sex. And a lot of kids don't understand that. The looks on their faces when I start talking about that. They get quiet, and then they begin little at a time. Well, I don't know. I don't like that part. I don't like that. That is what prostitution is. It's a sex act. It's not all that stuff that surrounds it is neither here nor there. It's about a sex act, and a lot of people don't really ask the kids about that. They're talking about all the surrounding things. And
Well, we definitely talk with the girls, and I say girls because it's everybody in my office identifies as girls, so just so people know. We ask the girls about sex, and I would say that there are a lot of jobs, including my own, where you can ask me, how do you feel when you're writing grants? You know what? Not super happy. You know what I'm saying? There's so many pieces of jobs. And I think that part of it is how we view sex in this country. You know what I mean? Why is sex the big taboo here? I don't like having to hustle for money, and I've told this to
because
people
so much of it is brutal.
over
That's
and
why.
over again, that I have not seen pimping like I have seen in the nonprofit industrial complex. Do you know what I mean? It's so crazy to me. The things that people have to do to run a good program is crazy to me. A lot of people don't like being day laborers. Do you know what I mean? Part of it is economic justice. Part of it is figuring out what you like, what works for you. But you may not like your job. You may not like every aspect of your job. You might only like pieces. You might only like the money. That's just how it is. I don't know.
Hi. Real quick, I was wondering, for all of you, where the majority of your clients, whether they come by their own volition or if they come referenced or referred after a prostitution arrest, and also what is your relationship with law enforcement? How do you work with the police?
Sure. All of our clients are voluntary and they come on their own, and we also do outreach into communities. We also occasionally get referrals from police, and very occasionally allow someone who's arrested to do mandated counseling sessions with us, especially if they were already a client there. We'll negotiate with the court system to allow their sentence of counseling be continued with their current therapist. However, we don't receive I think all of the other programs in New York City, except for Safe Horizon, who are trafficking programs, get their clients primarily by having them arrested and serving out their sentence as counseling sessions in their programs. And that's really common in trafficking, and we don't do that. Partially because we have to maintain a neutral relationship with the police, and we can't allow our funding to start. It just becomes kind of a weird thing that happens when you start depending on that flow, and you're sort of complicit in arrests in some way. But we do take mandated cases, very rare cases, and a lot of times the court will call us because they have a client that doesn't want to go into their mandated programs and who is asked, please send me to the sex workers project, and often that's because it's a client who feels that their needs are not met by the mandated programs. Our relationship with the police is, we know who we can trust. We build strong relationships with people in DA's office, on police departments, and on Vice. We go to all the meetings. We try to be in a conversation. We really try to be at the table, but we don't compromise our values, and we're always honest. And I think that we have developed a good working relationship And that's important because when a lot of our clients are victims of lots of crimes, human trafficking, rape, larger than expected number of our clients are victims of police brutality and rape by the police. And so they have to, it's a very delicate negotiation. Many of them do want justice, and they want to, their case, they want to see their day in court, and they want their perpetrator to be punished by the justice system. And so for someone who's been raped by the police to go forward to the police and report that requires a lot of good relationships having been built and a really strong advocate and lawyer to go with them. And so kind of all of our effort is put into maintaining that option for people.
None of our clients come from the police. We don't work with the police. I've worked with the police once, and it was in northern Massachusetts when there were, I've worked with the police and FBI when there were serial rapists who were targeting people in the sex trade. Yeah.
Our women come from all over. We do work with the police because we want to make sure we can keep up with the numbers of women that tell us that the police have done, raped them or been brutal to them in some way. We get so women are court ordered to our program, keeps them from going to jail. So we get a lot of women that are court ordered. We are on the streets. We have street outreach teams. We go into the jails. We go into battered women's shelters. We get referrals from all over. So our women come from everywhere, women and girls.
I'm afraid we've run out of time, but we're going to have a reception up in the Global Studies Center until the next session. So, our panelists will be there to answer questions one-on-one. And I hope you'll come back for our last panel at 3:30 on focused on human rights and sex trafficking. Thank you.
Thank you so much.